My name is Rachel Monroe, and growing up, I learned early that love wasn't something you were given, it was something you had to earn. At least in our house. At least from my mother, she never said it out loud, but it was obvious. Emily was the chosen one. The golden girl. She walked into a room and my mother's face lit up like a chandelier. Straight A's, piano recitals, polished shoes, everything Emily touched turned into a reason for applause. And me? I stayed quiet. I stayed useful. I ironed dresses, fetched tea, and made sure the fridge had the yogurt Emily liked. I became the helper, the one who didn't need attention, just a nod of approval to survive on. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a system. A rulebook I didn't get to write but had to follow. Emily made mistakes, my mother called them growth. I slipped up, and it was disappointing. I got used to hearing my name only when something needed fixing or when silence needed filling, but still, I tried. God, I tried so hard. I brought home decent grades. I volunteered. I smiled at the right times. I became a master of pretending I didn't notice. Because noticing meant hurting. And hurting meant breaking. And I couldn't afford to break. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear my mother on the phone with her friends, bragging about Emily. She's just like me, she'd say. And that line? That line sat in my chest like a stone. Because I wasn't like her. I didn't want to be. But I still wanted her to look at me like she meant it. Just once. I didn't know it then, but everything was already unraveling. Slowly. Quietly. And one day, all that pretending I did would collapse, and I'd stop being the backup. The garage was the only place that ever felt like mine, not because I claimed it, but because no one else wanted it. It smelled like oil and old cardboard boxes. The light flickered sometimes, and in winter, your breath came out in clouds. But that was where my father went when he needed quiet. And eventually, where I went too. He wasn't a loud man. He didn't lecture or interfere, not the way my mother did. He moved through the world like someone who'd seen too much, who knew the value of silence. But when it was just the two of us, tools clinking in the background, he'd talk. Not in long speeches. Just little pieces of himself, handed over like screws and bolts. That's where I learned he noticed things. He knew Emily was the favorite. He never said it like that, he wasn't cruel. But he'd glance at me sometimes and ask, "You doing okay?" in a way that made me feel like he actually meant it. Like he knew I wasn't. And when my mother would bark at me over nothing, or when Emily brushed past me like I was just furniture, he'd pat the seat next to him in the garage, and we'd just sit. One evening, a few months before he died, he was unusually still. He'd just finished tightening something under the hood of his old truck, and as he wiped his hands, he said, "I see it, you know. I see how she treats you. I see how Emily's turning out." He didn't say it angrily. Just, fact. Then he added, "I've made sure things are fair. You'll understand one day." I didn't ask what he meant. I just nodded. I didn't want to ruin the moment with hope, but after he died, I kept hearing those words on repeat in my head, "I've made sure things are fair." And I held on to that, because it was the only version of love I ever fully believed in. The morning of the funeral, the sky was a washed-out gray, like even the weather didn't want to feel anything. I wore a black dress that clung to me in all the wrong places, and I stood in front of the mirror longer than I should have, wondering if looking put together would somehow make the grief easier to carry. It didn't. The church smelled like lilies and dust. I walked in alone. Emily was already up front, dabbing her eyes like she was born for tragedy, sitting beside our mother who looked every bit the grieving widow in pearls and poise. She didn't even glance back when I slipped into the row behind them. Not a smile. Not a nod. Just like always, Emily gave the eulogy. She spoke about his work ethic, his love of jazz, the way he always showed up for her track meets. She didn't mention the garage. She didn't mention the way he used to hum when he was concentrating, or how he always said, "Drive safe." Like a prayer. She painted a version of him that was clean, polished, easy to digest. I felt like I was mourning someone no one else seemed to know. Afterward, people offered me soft condolences and sad eyes, but they hovered around Emily like she was the one who'd lost the most. My mother barely looked at me. When she did, it was with tired indifference. Later, she pulled me aside. "We're doing a will reading," she said flatly. "Emily will handle everything." I asked when. She just said, "Soon." I should have expected it, the way she said it, like it was already decided. Like I was just an afterthought, again. But a part of me still hoped. Still believed in what my father said, that he promised things would be fair, and maybe that promise was all that kept me from falling apart. The will reading didn't happen in a lawyer's office or around a polished table. Like I'd imagined. There was no ceremony, no moment of closure. Just my mother, standing in the hallway of our family home, holding a cream-colored envelope like it was a bill she didn't want to pay. She didn't invite me in. Didn't ask how I was holding up. She just opened the door enough to hand me the envelope and said, "This is for you." Her tone was clipped, hollow. As if she was doing a chore. I stood there, the autumn wind slicing through my dress. As she turned and walked away, inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. No legal seal. No explanation. Just a typed note, no signature, not even my name. We've decided Emily should handle things. It's better this way. I stared at the sentence until the words stopped making sense. We've decided. Not he decided. Not the will says. Just. I wasn't even mentioned in the photocopied version of the will she'd tucked behind the note. No share of the estate. No acknowledgement. Not even a keepsake. I went home in a daze. I put the envelope on the kitchen table and stared at it. Like it might rewrite itself if I looked hard enough. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. Clean. Cruel. Something broke in me then, not loudly, but sharply. A snapping of trust. A quiet collapse, but instead of crying, I got still. I thought about the garage. About my father's words. About how he told me he made things fair, and I realized, I wasn't crazy for hoping. I wasn't wrong to feel the weight of what had just been stolen. I had lost him, and now, they were trying to erase the only piece of him he'd left for me. No. Not this time. I didn't sleep that night. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't just grief anymore, it was betrayal. Cold and calculated. The kind that doesn't scream but settles into your bones and whispers, you were never meant to have anything. I sat at the kitchen table. For hours, staring at that envelope like it might catch fire and take all the hurt with it. But it didn't. It just sat there. Quiet and final. My mother didn't even try to hide it behind kindness. She handed me a lie and closed the door like she was done with me. Like all my years of silence, of folding myself small to fit into the background, meant nothing. And Emily? Not a word. Not a call. Not even a text. She had always been good at pretending we were sisters only when it was convenient. But this silence? This was something else. It felt like agreement. Approval. I thought about calling the lawyer, but I didn't have a name. I thought about confronting my mother, but I knew how that would go. She'd gaslight me until I started apologizing for even asking. But then I remembered the way my father's voice dropped low in the garage that night. The way his hands paused mid-wipe on that rag when he said, I've made sure things are fair. You'll understand one day. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe he meant it. So I pulled out the storage bins from the closet. I sifted through dusty files, old notebooks, crumpled receipts. I went down into the garage in my slippers, the cold concrete pressing into my skin. I looked where no one else would think to look, because no one else had those late-night talks. No one else knew the way his mind worked. It wasn't just about fairness anymore. It was about finally being seen. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not Emily. Not my mother. Not even the one friend I still had left in town. Some things, you have to hold close, like a flame cupped in your hands. One wrong move, and it's gone. The garage was freezing. Dust clung to the shelves like it belonged there more than I did. My father's tools still hung in perfect rows, untouched since the day he passed. I moved slowly, scared to disturb the air, but I searched, behind the workbench, inside old cabinets, between the pages of the maintenance logbooks he kept religiously. Nothing, but I knew him, and he knew her. He knew what she was capable of. He wouldn't have trusted her with something like this. So I looked again. This time with intent. In the corner, tucked behind a stack of paint cans, I found it, an old metal lockbox, the kind with a combination dial and rust along the edges. I stared at it for a long time. My hands shook when I touched it, whether from cold or fear. I couldn't say. I tried his birthday. Nothing. Then mine. Still nothing. Finally, I tried Emily's. The numbers clicked. My breath caught in my throat as the lid creaked open. Inside were old photos, a watch, a letter addressed to me, and under all of it, a sealed manila envelope with a law office's name stamped in the corner, the second will, signed. Notarized. Dated just 3 months before he died, and there, in black ink and clear language, everything was to be split equally between me and Emily. My knees gave out. And I sat on the cold floor holding it like a lifeline. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't invisible. He had seen me all along. I walked into the lawyer's office with the envelope pressed flat against my chest, like it might vanish if I let it go. My breath was shallow. My voice, smaller than I wanted. I told the receptionist I had a will I needed someone to look at. She glanced at the manila envelope, then at me, and nodded without a word. The lawyer's name was Harris. Mid-50s, tired eyes, the kind of man who'd seen more family betrayals than he cared to count. I handed him the envelope, sat across from his desk, and tried not to wring my hands. He took his time reading. The silence stretched, sharp and thick. Finally, he looked up. This is valid, he said, like it was obvious. Like I wasn't still waiting for the ground to shift. Legally binding. Notarized. Clear instructions. He paused. This overrides any previous documents, assuming the date is accurate. And it is. Something in my chest cracked open. Not in pain, but in relief. Like finally exhaling after holding your breath for years. I told him about the envelope my mother gave me. About the fake will. The note. The silence. He didn't react much, just nodded slowly, lips pressed into a flat line. We'll file it, he said. You'll need to present it in probate court. I'll handle the rest. I left his office lighter. Not happy, not yet. But steady. Like a woman who had been pushed 1 inch too far and decided not to stay down this time. I didn't tell anyone. Not Emily. Not my mother. I wanted them to feel safe. Comfortable. Certain, because when the truth hits people like them, it's not the noise that undoes them, it's the silence right before, and I was done playing small in the background of their lies. The day of the hearing, I dressed simply. No frills. Just a clean black blazer and a steady heart. I wasn't there to perform. I wasn't there to beg. I was there to show the truth, calmly, clearly, undeniably. Emily was already seated when I walked in. Her heels crossed neatly, nails polished, face unreadable. She didn't look at me. My mother sat beside her, lips pinched, arms folded like this was all beneath her. Like she still believed she could control how this story ended. My lawyer, Mr. Harris, greeted me with a nod. No pep talk. No false optimism. Just presence. That was enough. The judge entered. Formalities were exchanged. Then Harris stood and walked the second will to the bench, quietly, without theatrics. He placed it down like he was setting the truth itself in front of them. This is the most recent, valid will, he said. Signed and notarized, with clear terms. It supersedes the previously submitted copy. The judge flipped through the pages. Silence hung heavy in the room. Then it happened. My mother's face twitched. Just once. A flicker in the corner of her mouth, like something had cracked. She leaned toward her lawyer, whispering urgently. Emily glanced at her, confused. Then, she looked back at me, just briefly, and I saw it. Betrayal, like she'd just realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a decision, and I sat still. No gloating. Not theirs. Just a quiet exhale. Because for once, I wasn't fighting for someone to believe me, I was watching the truth speak for itself. The court accepted the new will into record. The assets were to be split equally. Everything they tried to erase was now on paper, permanent, legal, and I didn't have to say a single word. After court, I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car for a long time, parked beneath a tree that had lost most of its leaves, just watching the wind scatter what remained. The quiet felt different now. It wasn't loneliness. It was peace. The kind that comes after a long war, not because everything's perfect, but because you survived. My phone lit up with messages I didn't open. Point 1 from Emily, we need to talk. Point 1 from my mother, I hope you're proud of yourself. That one made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because, yes, I was. For the first time in my life, I was proud of myself for not shrinking. For not letting them write me out of my own story. Later that night, Emily showed up at my door. She didn't even knock at first, just stood there, wrapped in a coat too thin for the cold, arms crossed like armor. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. You really went behind our backs, she asked. I tilted my head. You mean? I uncovered the truth you were happy to hide. Her face twisted, confused, angry, maybe a little ashamed. You could have just talked to us. I laughed then. Quiet, tired. I did. For years. You just never listened. She didn't have an answer for that, and behind her eyes, I saw it, that flicker of guilt. Or maybe fear. Because she wasn't just losing control. She was losing the version of me she'd learned to ignore. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I just said, you got what you thought you wanted. And I got what Dad wanted for me. Then I closed the door. Gently. Finally, not to shut her out, but to let myself in. It's strange how quiet feels when you're not filling it with fear. The house is still. The kind of stillness that used to make me feel invisible. But now? It feels like mine. Like breathing space. Like the absence of judgment. I made tea this morning. Sat by the window. Let the light fall across the floor and didn't rush to do anything about it. There's a pile of paperwork on the table, estate forms, bank transfers, loose ends that still need tying. But for once, they don't feel like proof I have to earn my place. They're just tasks. Nothing more. Emily hasn't called again. My mother sent one more message, a curt line about regret and family. I didn't reply. I think some silences are answers. For years, I carried this ache. The ache of being the one who was almost enough. Always close. Always reaching. I tried to make myself useful. Palatable. Easy to love, but all it did was teach them how to overlook me. It took losing everything to realize that I didn't have to beg for space in a family that built their foundation on favoritism. It took a lie, a locked box, and a man who once whispered in a garage that he saw me, to finally believe I deserved more. And maybe this isn't a fairy tale ending. No ribbons. No family hug. No dramatic apology, but it's real. I have my half of the house now. My father's watch sits on the shelf, ticking quietly like a reminder. I was never crazy. I was never lesser. I was never invisible. He knew, and now, so do I.